At my own brother's wedding, the bride pointed at me and said I wasn't welcome. In front of 200 guests, she had security escort me out like I was a stranger. What she didn't know was that I had paid for almost everything, and before the cake was even cut, I made one phone call and canceled it all. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to Storyflow Diaries. I never imagined my little brother's wedding would be the day I finally understood what it feels like to be erased from your own family. I'm the older sister. I've always been the steady one, the responsible one, the one who stayed close to home when everyone else chased dreams. I helped raise my brother Daniel after our dad passed away. I was 16, he was 8. I packed his lunches, I went to his school plays, I taught him how to shave before his first high school dance. When he got his first job, he hugged me and said, "You're more like my mom than my sister." I carried those words in my heart for years. So when he got engaged to Leela, I was happy for him, truly happy. She was beautiful, confident, polished in a way I never was. She worked in event planning, had a social media following, and spoke about aesthetic like it was a religion. At first, she was sweet to me. She'd call me sis and ask for advice about Daniel's childhood stories. But somewhere between the engagement party and the wedding planning, something shifted. I started noticing how she corrected Daniel when he mentioned me. "Actually, we're doing it this way," she'd say, smiling too wide. She didn't like that Daniel and I were close. She didn't like that he trusted me with money decisions. She definitely didn't like that I was the one paying for the wedding. It wasn't supposed to be that way originally. Daniel and Leela wanted something small. But Leela's vision kept growing. A vineyard venue, 5-course catering, live band, custom floral installations. Daniel called me one night, his voice tight with stress. "I don't know how we're going to afford this," he admitted. I had savings. I never married. I never had children. I worked overtime for years at the hospital, putting money aside just in case. And in that moment, my little brother was my just in case. So I offered. I told him I would cover the venue deposit and catering. It was meant to be a gift, a blessing. He cried when I transferred the first payment. Leela hugged me at dinner and said, "You're such a lifesaver." But gratitude has an expiration date when pride gets involved. As the months passed, I was invited to fewer planning meetings. Leela would send me invoices without discussion. "Can you handle this?" she'd text. I paid for the photographer, the band, the wedding dress alterations when her original seamstress ruined the vision. Every time I paid, I told myself it was worth it to see Daniel happy. But then came the seating chart. Leela emailed it to the family group chat. I scrolled down, searching for my name. I was at table 17, in the back corner, near the restrooms. At first, I laughed. I assumed it was a mistake. I called Daniel. "Oh, Leela said it made sense because you'll probably want to help with things," he said casually. "Help with things?" I asked. "Yeah, like vendors or whatever. You're good at organizing." I swallowed the sting. I was funding the wedding, but apparently I was staff. I told myself not to overthink it. Weddings are stressful. I chose peace. I always choose peace. The morning of the wedding, I arrived early. The vineyard was stunning. Gold sunlight spilled over the hills. The white chairs lined up perfectly. The flowers I had paid for looked like something out of a magazine. I felt proud. I felt included in a quiet way. Leela was in the bridal suite when I knocked. I brought her favorite iced latte as a peace offering. She opened the door halfway, already in her silk robe, makeup half done. She looked at me like I'd shown up uninvited. "Oh," she said flatly. "Hi." I smiled. "Just wanted to check if you needed anything." She glanced behind her at her bridesmaids, then back at me. "Actually, we're keeping this space just for the bridal party." The words were polite, but the tone wasn't. I nodded. "Of course. I just wanted to give you this." She took the coffee without thanking me. Then she said something I still hear in my sleep. "By the way, I think it would be better if you didn't hover today." I blinked. "Hover?" "Yeah, you tend to insert yourself. Daniel needs to focus on me today." The sentence felt like a slap. I stepped back. "I've done nothing but support you both." She smiled again, that tight, practiced smile. "Exactly, and now you can support from a distance." I left the suite, my chest tight. I told myself to let it go. It's her wedding day. Don't make it about you. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel looked radiant. When he saw me in the aisle before it began, he mouthed, "Thank you." I held on to that moment like a lifeline. After the vows, during cocktail hour, I went to find my seat. Table 17 was exactly where I feared. In the back, a few distant cousins and plus ones I didn't recognize. I sat down quietly. When dinner service started, there was confusion. The coordinator approached me. "Ma'am, there's an issue with payment processing. The final catering installment didn't clear." My heart skipped. That installment was scheduled at midnight. I had intentionally set it that way. I wanted everything secure before releasing the last $40,000. I pulled out my phone to check, but before I could open my banking app, I heard Leela's voice slice through the air. She was standing near the head table, whispering harshly to one of the planners. Then she looked directly at me and pointed. "Why is she sitting there?" she demanded loud enough for half the guests to hear. The coordinator approached me awkwardly. "There's been a change. You're actually not assigned a seat." "Not assigned?" I repeated. Leela walked over herself now, her gown shimmering, her expression anything but joyful. "I thought we discussed this," she said. "Discussed what?" I asked quietly. "That today isn't about extended family dynamics." My ears rang. "I am his sister, and today I am his wife," she snapped, no longer smiling. "You've overstepped for months. This is my day. If you can't respect that, maybe you shouldn't stay." Around us, conversations had gone silent. I searched for Daniel. He was across the lawn, laughing with his groomsmen, oblivious. Leela leaned closer. "Please leave. You're making me uncomfortable." That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just cleanly. I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she had mistaken my kindness for weakness. "All right," I said softly. "I'll go." She looked relieved. Security appeared as if summoned by magic. They escorted me towards the exit while guests pretended not to stare. I didn't cry, not yet. I sat in my car, hands shaking. Then I opened my banking app, and I canceled the final payment. I canceled. Daniel called 8 times before I even reached the highway. I let every call go to voicemail. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but inside, my heart felt like it was splintering. I kept replaying Lila's words in my mind, extended family dynamics, as if I were some distant cousin who wandered in off the street, as if I hadn't spent half my life making sure Daniel never felt alone. When I finally pulled into a gas station 20 miles away, I turned off the engine and checked my phone. There were 12 missed calls now, 5 voicemails, a flood of texts. The first message from Daniel read, "What happened? Why did you leave?" The next one came minutes later. "Lila says you caused a scene." I laughed out loud at that. Caused a scene. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't cried. I hadn't argued. I simply stood up and walked out. The third message hit harder. "Did you cancel the payments?" So it had already begun. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. For months, I had swallowed every slight, every dismissive comment, every time Lila subtly pushed me out of the frame. I told myself it was wedding stress. I told myself love would smooth it over. But love doesn't grow where respect is missing. I called Daniel back. He answered on the first ring. "What did you do?" he demanded. His voice wasn't panicked, it was angry. That stung more than anything. "I left," I said calmly. "That's not what I mean. You canceled the catering final. You froze the band payment. They're refusing to continue unless it's resolved." I took a slow breath. I was asked to leave my own brother's wedding. There was a pause, heavy and tense. Lila felt uncomfortable, he said carefully. Uncomfortable, I repeated. Daniel, she had security escort me out. You were upsetting her, he insisted. She said you were undermining her all day. The words felt unreal. I brought her coffee, I said quietly. I sat at the table I was assigned. He exhaled sharply. You don't understand how hard this has been on her. You're always there. Always there. The irony nearly made me choke. I had been there when he broke his arm at 12. I was there when he failed his driving test and cried in the parking lot. I was there when he couldn't afford rent in college. And now suddenly, being there was the problem. Daniel, I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay steady, did you know she removed my seat? Silence again. Then, she said you offered to step back. I actually gasped. I never said that. He sounded conflicted now. She told me you agreed it might be better if you didn't sit up front. I wasn't even near the front. I was by the restrooms. Another silence, this one longer. I could hear muffled voices in the background. Music had stopped entirely now. They're threatening to shut down dinner service. Guests are confused. I didn't respond right away. I imagined the elegant tables, the half-poured wine glasses, the whispers spreading from guest to guest. I didn't want humiliation for him, but I also refused to keep paying for my own disrespect. Daniel, I said softly, did you see them escort me out? He hesitated. I was talking to Uncle Ray. So you didn't see your wife tell me to leave? He didn't answer. That told me everything. I swallowed the ache rising in my throat. I have spent over $80,000 on this wedding. Not once did I ask for recognition. Not once did I complain about being excluded. But the moment I was told I wasn't welcome, I realized something. He sounded tired now. What? You didn't defend me. The line went very quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. This is my wedding day. I can't fight with my wife. You didn't fight, I said. You chose. Another long pause. Then his voice hardened again. Are you going to fix this or not? There it was. Not an apology, not confusion, not even curiosity, just expectation. I felt something inside me settle into place, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. No, I said simply, not until I'm treated like family. He scoffed softly. You're being dramatic. I closed my eyes as tears finally slipped down my cheeks. Maybe, but I'm done being invisible. He hung up. The finality of that click echoed louder than any shouting could have. I sat there for several minutes, letting myself cry. Not loud sobs, just quiet grief. For the little boy who once held my hand crossing the street. For the teenager who asked me to check his homework. For the grown man who now saw me as an inconvenience. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Daniel, it was Lila. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. I answered. What exactly are you thinking you're doing? She snapped. No greeting, no pretense. Protecting myself, I replied calmly. You embarrassed us, she hissed. Guests are leaving. The caterer is refusing to serve the main course without confirmation. I was embarrassed first, I said quietly. She let out a sharp laugh. You made my wedding about you. The accusation landed heavy, but I didn't flinch. No, I replied. You made your wedding about pushing me out, and I simply stopped paying for it. Her breathing was uneven now. Do you know how this looks? Yes, it looks like consequences. There was a beat of stunned silence. She hadn't expected resistance. She had mistaken my silence for submission. "If you ever want a relationship with your brother again," she warned, "you'll reverse everything right now." And that was when I understood. This wasn't about stress. This wasn't about misunderstandings. This was about control. She wanted to establish territory, and I had unknowingly been standing on it for months. "Lila," I said gently, "a relationship built on fear isn't one I want." She hung up without another word. I sat there until the sky began to darken. When I finally drove home, I didn't turn on the radio. I let the quiet fill the car. When I walked into my empty house, the silence wrapped me around like a blanket. I expected regret. I expected panic. But instead, I felt something unfamiliar: relief. For the first time in years, I hadn't chosen peace at my own expense. I made tea, I sat at my kitchen table, and I waited. My phone remained silent for nearly an hour. Then, just after 9 p.m., it rang again. It was Daniel. His voice when I answered was no longer angry, it was shaken. "They shut it down," he said quietly. "Half the guests left." I closed my eyes. When Daniel asked me why I hadn't told him how bad it had gotten, I didn't answer right away. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my untouched tea, and realized that I didn't even know where to begin. How do you explain 1,000 tiny cuts to someone who only notices the final wound? "Because I didn't think you would hear me," I finally said. He let out a slow breath on the other end. "I would have listened." I almost smiled at that. The confidence in his voice sounded so certain, so sure of something that wasn't true. "Would you?" I asked gently. "Or would you have told me she was stressed?" Silence again. I wasn't trying to attack him. I was just tired of pretending. I leaned back in my chair and let the memories spill out. "Do you remember the cake tasting?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yeah." "She told the baker I was just helping with logistics. When the woman asked if I was the wedding coordinator, Lila said, 'No, she just likes to feel involved.'" Daniel didn't respond. "At the dress fitting," I continued, "she told the seamstress I wouldn't understand the design because I don't live that lifestyle. And at the rehearsal dinner planning, she removed my name from the toast list without telling me." I swallowed hard. I didn't say anything because every time I tried to bring up feeling excluded, you looked torn, and I didn't want to be the reason you felt pulled between us. His voice softened. "I didn't know she said those things." "I believe you," I replied quietly. "But that's the problem. You didn't know, and you didn't notice." He exhaled sharply, like the weight of it was finally pressing down on him. "She told me you preferred to stay in the background. She said you didn't like attention." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "I don't, but I don't like being erased either." There it was, the word that had been sitting in my chest all day: erased. When she told me to leave tonight, it wasn't just about a seat, it was about months of being slowly pushed aside. And when security walked me out, I realized I had been funding my own removal. The line went very quiet. I could hear faint noises in the background, car doors closing, distant voices. The celebration was long over now. "Lila's furious," he said after a moment. "She says you sabotaged the wedding." I didn't flinch. I stopped paying for something I was told I wasn't part of. He didn't argue with that, and that silence felt different this time. Not defensive, not dismissive, thinking. "The caterer packed up," he admitted. "The band left before the first dance. We ended up cutting the cake in the parking lot with about 20 people left." His voice cracked slightly. "It wasn't supposed to be like that." For the first time since this started, I heard the little boy in him again, the one who used to cry when his birthday balloons popped too soon. "I know," I said softly. "I never wanted that for you." Another pause, then cautiously, "Can you reverse the payments tomorrow?" There it was again, the expectation, not cruel this time, but still there. I closed my eyes. "Daniel," I said carefully, "if I reverse everything without an apology, what changes?" He didn't answer. "She'll learn that she can humiliate me and I'll still fund her lifestyle, and you'll learn that I'll accept whatever treatment keeps the peace." My voice trembled slightly, but I kept going. "I love you, but I won't teach anyone that I'm disposable." He sounded exhausted now. "She feels like you're trying to control us with money." That hurt, because if anything, I had used money to avoid control, to make sure he never felt trapped the way I once did growing up, watching our mother struggle after Dad passed. I took a slow breath. If I wanted control, I would have attached conditions. I never did. I gave freely, but giving freely doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. On the other end, I heard a car door slam, then Lila's voice in the distance, sharp and agitated. "Is that her?" I heard faintly. Daniel muffled the phone. "Just give me a minute," he muttered. I could picture it perfectly, her in her gown, makeup smudged, anger simmering, not embarrassed by what she'd done, but furious that it had consequences. When Daniel came back on the line, his tone had shifted again, more guarded. "She says you're manipulating me." I felt strangely calm now. "Am I?" He didn't respond. "Did I ask you to choose me over her, or did she ask you to remove me?" His breathing was uneven. "She just wanted boundaries." Boundaries aren't exile. They're mutual. They're respectful. What happened tonight wasn't a boundary. It was a statement. Another long silence. Then quietly he asked, "What do you want?" That question surprised me. No one had asked me that in months. I stared at the wall, at the family photo hanging there. Daniel at 10, missing his front tooth, grinning beside me at my high school graduation. "I want acknowledgement," I said finally. "I want her to admit she disrespected me, and I want you to admit you let it happen." He didn't argue. He didn't defend her. He just breathed, and that small shift told me more than any apology could have. In the background, I heard Lila again, louder now. "Tell her if she doesn't fix this, she's not welcome in our lives." The words carried clearly through the phone. This time I didn't flinch. I waited for Daniel to respond. There was a long stretch of muffled voices, then something I never expected to hear. "Lila, stop," he said firmly. Not shouting, not pleading. Firm. "This isn't just about money." There was more arguing, too muffled to make out, but I heard frustration in his voice, not at me, at the situation, at her. The call disconnected abruptly. I stared at my phone, unsure what that meant. Minutes passed. Then my screen lit up with a text from Daniel, "I need time to think." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. My house was quiet, but inside me something had shifted. Not anger, not triumph, clarity. For years I believed love meant sacrifice, that keeping peace meant swallowing pain. But tonight, sitting alone in my kitchen while my brother's wedding unraveled miles away, I realized something else. Love without respect is just obligation, and I was done living on obligation. I washed my untouched teacup. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to bed unsure of what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt steady, and sometimes steady is stronger than loud. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the vineyard lights flickering out one by one. I heard the murmur of confused guests, the scrape of chairs being folded too soon. I imagined Daniel standing there in his tuxedo, watching a day he had dreamed about unravel in slow motion. And no matter how steady I tried to feel, guilt crept in around the edges. Not because I was wrong, but because I loved him. The next morning, I woke up to 23 unread messages. Most were from extended family. Aunt Carla, what happened last night? Cousin Nate, why did the caterer leave? Uncle Ray, call me. There were also 2 messages from Lila's mother. The first read, I don't know what kind of stunt you pulled, but you've humiliated our family. The second was less restrained. I didn't respond to any of them. I made coffee instead, sat by the window, watched the sunlight stretch across my quiet living room. For the first time in months, there was no invoice waiting, no vendor calling, no subtle reminder that I was needed but not wanted. At 10:30, Daniel finally called. His voice sounded different, less defensive, more worn. Can we meet? He asked. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I knew this conversation would change something permanently. Where? I asked. Your place, he said. Lila doesn't want me going alone, but I need to. That sentence lingered in the air after we hung up. He arrived an hour later, still in yesterday's tuxedo pants, but the jacket was gone. His white shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were red. He looked younger somehow, like the weight of adulthood had cracked open overnight. When I opened the door, we just stood there for a moment. No anger, no shouting, just exhaustion. Hi, he said quietly. Hi. He stepped inside slowly, glancing around like it had been years since he'd visited. He used to come over every Sunday for dinner. After he met Lila, those visits became once a month, then once every few months, then only for holidays. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he used to do his homework while I cooked spaghetti. I poured him coffee. He didn't drink it. She's furious, he began. Her parents are threatening to sue you for damages. I almost laughed. For canceling payments that were in my name? He rubbed his face. They say you caused emotional distress. Daniel, I said gently, she had me escorted out. He nodded slowly. I know. The words hung between us. I searched his face. Did you ask her why? He looked down at the table. She said she felt like you were trying to overshadow her, like people were thanking you more than congratulating her. That surprised me. I had stayed deliberately quiet. I hadn't made a speech. I hadn't told anyone I paid for anything. Who was thanking me? I asked. The venue owner mentioned how generous you were, he admitted, and the florist told her she'd never worked with a sister so dedicated. I let out a slow breath. So it wasn't about hovering. It wasn't about boundaries. It was about attention, about insecurity. Daniel looked up at me, eyes filled with something close to regret. I should have seen it, he said softly. Every time she'd make a comment about you being too involved, I thought she was just nervous. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I simply nodded. Why didn't you defend me when she asked me to leave? I asked gently. He swallowed hard. Because she told me earlier that if I didn't set boundaries with you, she'd walk away. The words hit like a quiet thunderclap. She threatened to leave? He nodded. She said she couldn't marry someone who was still emotionally married to his sister. My stomach twisted. That's not normal, I said quietly. I know, he whispered. But I was afraid. There it was, the truth. He wasn't choosing her over me out of cruelty. He was choosing stability out of fear. So when she pointed at you, he continued, voice shaking slightly, I froze. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd fix it later. But then you left, and everything spiraled. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then he looked at me, really looked at me. Did you ever plan to cancel? I shook my head.
The final installment was scheduled at midnight. I wanted everything secure before releasing it. When she told me to leave, I realized I couldn't press send. He nodded slowly. The guests started whispering when dinner stopped. Her dad yelled at the catering manager. Lila locked herself in the bridal suite. His voice cracked. It was chaos. I felt a pang of sorrow, but not regret, just sadness that it came to this. "Do you regret it?" he asked suddenly. I considered that carefully. "I regret that you were hurt," I said honestly, "but I don't regret standing up for myself." He absorbed that quietly. Then, after a long pause, he said something I never expected. "I don't think I can stay with her." My breath caught. "Daniel." "I'm serious," he interrupted. "Last night wasn't just about you. When the payment stopped, she didn't ask if you were okay. She didn't ask why. She just screamed about embarrassment, about optics, about how her followers would react if photos leaked." He shook his head slowly. "I kept thinking, if she can discard you so easily, what happens when I disappoint her?" The question lingered heavy between us. I didn't want to be the reason his marriage ended. I didn't want to be the wedge, but I also couldn't lie. "You deserve someone who sees family as an expansion, not a competition," I said softly. He closed his eyes briefly. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. He hadn't done that in years. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And that apology wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. I felt tears rise again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from relief. "I needed you to say that," I admitted. He squeezed my hand. "I should have protected you." I shook my head gently. "You're not my protector. We're equals, but respect goes both ways." He nodded slowly, understanding settling into his expression. "What happens now?" he asked. I exhaled softly. "That depends on what you're willing to confront." He looked toward the window, sunlight catching the exhaustion on his face. "She's at her parents' house. They want an apology from you before they'll even discuss repayment." I almost laughed. "They'll be waiting a long time." He huffed. When Daniel said he didn't want to lose me, something inside my chest loosened in a way I hadn't realized was still tight. I had prepared myself for anger, for permanent distance, for a fracture that might never mend. But hearing him say that reminded me that beneath all the confusion and manipulation, he was still my little brother. I reached for the coffee he hadn't touched and slid it closer to him. "You're not losing me," I said quietly, "but you have to decide what kind of life you're building and who you're allowed to keep in it." He stared at the table for a long moment. "She's already telling people you sabotaged the wedding out of jealousy." The word jealousy felt almost absurd. "Jealousy of what?" I asked softly. "Of her," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "She said you've always been possessive." I let out a slow breath. Not defensive, not outraged, just tired. "Daniel, I helped raise you. That's attachment, not possession." He nodded faintly. "I know that now." There was something different in his voice, a kind of awakening that only comes when illusion cracks. "After I left your house last night," he continued, "I went back to the vineyard to collect our things. Her parents were arguing with the venue manager about breach of contract. Lila was on her phone, crying, but not about the marriage, about the pictures. She kept saying the lighting was ruined and the aesthetic was destroyed." He looked up at me, pain flickering in his eyes. I realized I was secondary. That sentence hung heavy in the room. I didn't rush to fill the silence.
When I tried to talk to her calmly, he said, she told me this was all my fault for not controlling you. He swallowed hard. Controlling you? I felt a flicker of anger at that word, but it passed quickly. Control had never been my language. Support had been. What did you say? I asked. I told her you weren't a child, and neither was I. His jaw tightened slightly. She didn't like that. I could imagine she wouldn't. For months, she had drawn lines quietly, reshaping dynamics, testing how far she could push. Now one of those lines had snapped. She gave me an ultimatum this morning, he said softly. Either I cut you off completely or she files for annulment. I blinked slowly. Already? He nodded. She says she can't start a marriage with divided loyalty. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing the weight of that. This wasn't about a seating chart. This wasn't about stress. This was about isolation, about narrowing someone's world until only one voice remained. What do you want? I asked him again. This time he didn't hesitate. I want peace, but not the kind that costs me my family. His answer felt steady, not reactive, not emotional, just clear. Then you already know what this is, I said gently. He nodded, though it looked like the admission hurt. I think I married someone who sees love as ownership. The words were quiet but firm. We sat in that truth together, neither of us rushing to soften it. After a few minutes, he pulled his phone from his pocket. She's posting already, he muttered. I frowned. Posting? He turned the screen toward me. There was a photo of her standing alone in her wedding gown captioned, "Some people can't stand to see you shine, but God reveals true colors eventually." The comments were flooding in. Sympathy, outrage, vague accusations. No names mentioned, but the implication was clear. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from recognition. She was rewriting the narrative before anyone could question it. Do you want me to respond? He asked. I shook my head slowly. No. He looked surprised. Why not? Because the louder someone tries to control the story, the more obvious the insecurity becomes. Truth doesn't need to shout. He studied my face carefully. You're not angry? I thought about that. Anger had flared briefly, but what remained wasn't rage. It was clarity. I was angry yesterday, I admitted, but today I just see it for what it is. He exhaled, almost in relief. I feel embarrassed, he confessed quietly, like I should have seen this sooner. Love can blur edges, I said gently, especially when someone knows how to play to your fears. He looked up at me. She always said she was afraid of losing me. And sometimes, I replied softly, people push hardest when they're trying to secure control, not connection. The room grew quiet again. Then he did something that made my throat tighten. He reached into his pocket and placed his wedding ring on the table between us. Not dramatically, not angrily, just deliberately. I told her I needed space. She said if I walked out, not to come back. I looked at the ring. It felt symbolic, not just of a marriage, but of a lesson learned too quickly. Are you sure? I asked. He nodded slowly. If the foundation is built on ultimatums, it won't survive storms. His words sounded older than he was, and in that moment I saw growth. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Her parents are going to come after you for the money, he warned. They might try legal threats. I gave a small, steady smile. Let them. The contracts are in my name. Payments were voluntary, not loans. He nodded faintly. I don't want you dragged through this. I'm already through it, I said gently. Last night was the storm. Today is just cleanup. He gave a quiet huff of laughter at that. Then his expression turned serious again. Do you think she ever loved me? The question caught me off guard. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't angry. It was vulnerable. Daniel didn't leave my house right away. After he said he was going to end it, we both just stood there for a moment, as if the weight of that decision needed time to settle into the room. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was quiet. Resolve rarely shouts. It simply stands still and refuses to move. "I should go talk to her in person," he finally said. I nodded slowly. "Are you safe?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He gave me a faint smile. "She's not violent. She's just persuasive." I understood exactly what he meant. Words can corner you just as effectively as hands can. He picked up his ring from the table, stared at it one last time, then slipped it into his pocket, not back onto his finger. "I'll call you," he said, "no matter what happens." I walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, I felt that familiar ache again. Not fear of losing him, but the recognition that childhood had officially ended, for both of us. The rest of that day passed slowly. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't check social media. I cleaned my kitchen, watered the plants, folded laundry that didn't need folding. My phone stayed silent until nearly 4 in the afternoon. Then it rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I answered immediately. "It's done," he said. His voice wasn't shattered. It was steady, but underneath it I could hear exhaustion. "Are you okay?" I asked. "You will be," he replied. After a pause, he added, "She didn't fight for us. She fought to win." That sentence told me everything. He explained what happened in pieces. He had gone to her parents' house. Lila was waiting in the living room, still in yesterday's gown, as if refusing to change would somehow reverse time. When he told her he needed space, not from the wedding drama, but from the pattern, she laughed at first. She thought he was bluffing. But when he didn't soften, when he didn't apologize, when he didn't turn the blame back onto me, her tone shifted. "She said I was choosing you over my wife," he told me quietly. And I said I wasn't choosing sides. I was choosing respect. My chest tightened at that. I hadn't asked him to defend me, but hearing that he had, that he finally saw it, meant more than the money ever could. "Her father threatened lawyers," Daniel continued. "He said annulment aren't free and reputations matter." I could picture the scene perfectly, the posturing, the pressure, the attempt to intimidate. "And what did you say?" I asked. I told him the only reputation I care about is my own. There was a small pause. Then Daniel exhaled slowly. "She said if I walked out that door, she'd make sure everyone knew what kind of sister I had." I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. When control slips, narrative becomes the weapon. "Did that scare you?" I asked gently. "No," he answered honestly. "It made me sad." That answer told me he was already moving forward. Sadness means you're grieving what you hoped it could be, not clinging to what it wasn't. He left her parents' house with nothing but his overnight bag. By the time he called me, he was sitting in his car in a grocery store parking lot. "I don't even know where to go," he admitted quietly. The vulnerability in his voice pulled at me. "You can come here," I said without hesitation. He was silent for a second. "Are you sure?" "Daniel," I replied softly, "this has always been your home." He arrived 20 minutes later. This time he didn't look like a groom. He looked like someone who had just stepped off a moving train. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes tired, but there was something else too, a strange calm. He walked inside, set his bag down, and just stood there, taking in the quiet. "It's peaceful here," he murmured. I handed him a glass of water. "Peace doesn't require permission," I said. He sat at the kitchen table again, elbows resting on the wood. "She already posted," he said flatly. I didn't ask what it said. I could guess. She wrote that she escaped a toxic family dynamic before it destroyed her future. He looked up at me. "She called you manipulative and implied I was financially controlled." I let out a slow breath. There it was, the final rewrite of the story. "Does it bother you?" he asked. I thought carefully before answering. It would have devastated me a year ago, but now it just confirms I made the right choice. He studied my face, as if trying to understand how I wasn't unraveling. "How are you so calm?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Because I already lost what I was afraid of losing. When she had me escorted out, that was the worst moment. The rest is just noise." He nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the table between us. It was the wedding gift I had bought them, a custom engraved watch for him, a bracelet for her. I stared at it quietly. "I couldn't keep it," he said. "It doesn't belong to that story anymore." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. This wasn't just about a canceled reception anymore. This was about identity, about learning who you are when someone tries to shrink you. "You don't have to give it back," I said softly. "I want to," he replied, "because I want the next chapter to start clean." The word clean echoed in my mind. That's what this felt like. Not revenge, not victory, clean. We sat there for a while without speaking. The late afternoon light filtered through the window, warm and golden, the same kind of light that had filled the vineyard the day before. It felt like another lifetime. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," he said again quietly. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Sometimes we need contrast to see clearly," I replied. "You saw it when it mattered." He nodded faintly. Then he looked at me with something steady in his eyes. "Thank you for not fixing it," he said. That caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "If you had reversed those payments, I would have stayed. I would have convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. You forcing a boundary forced me to face it." I let those words settle inside me, because that was the truth I hadn't fully admitted to myself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do isn't rescue someone from discomfort, it's let the discomfort reveal the truth. And in that quiet kitchen, with the wedding over and the illusion gone, I realized something powerful. I hadn't destroyed his marriage. I had simply refused to fund my own disappearance. The house felt different that evening. Not heavy, not tense, just quiet in a way that felt earned. Daniel took the guest room, the same one he used when he stayed over during college breaks. I found fresh sheets in the closet while he showered, and for a brief moment, I was thrown back years to when he was 17 and had the flu. I used to sit at the edge of that same bed, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. Back then, I thought my job was to protect him from pain. Now, I understood something deeper. I wasn't meant to shield him from consequences. I was meant to stand steady when he faced them. After dinner, simple soup and toast, nothing fancy, we sat in the living room. The television stayed off. His phone buzzed constantly on the coffee table. He flipped it face down. "They're all picking sides," he said quietly. "Her cousins, her friends, some of ours." I nodded. People love clarity. They don't love complexity. It's easier to label someone a villain than to untangle layers of insecurity and pride. "Are you going to respond?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not tonight." That was growth too. He didn't need to defend himself in the court of public opinion. He needed space to think. About an hour later, there was a knock at my door. Sharp, impatient. Daniel and I looked at each other at the same time. We both knew who it was. I walked to the door slowly and opened it. Lila stood there, no longer in her wedding gown. She wore jeans and a tight expression. Her makeup was gone. Her eyes were red, but not from softness, from fury. "We need to talk," she said, stepping forward as if she owned the threshold. I didn't move. You can talk here, I replied calmly. Daniel appeared behind me, his posture stiffened slightly when he saw her. You didn't answer my calls, she snapped at him. I said I needed space, he answered quietly. Space, she scoffed. You ran back to her. She looked at me like I was something sour. This is exactly what I meant. She inserts herself everywhere. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the urge to defend myself. I simply stood still. Daniel stepped forward. Stop, he said firmly. She blinked, surprised. Stop blaming her for our problems. That landed. She looked between us, disbelief flickering across her face. You're really doing this? She demanded. Over a dinner service glitch? He shook his head slowly. This was never about dinner. Her laugh was sharp and brittle. So what, now I'm the villain because I wanted boundaries? Boundaries don't involve humiliation, he replied evenly. You had her escorted out. Lila's jaw tightened. She was undermining me. All day people were thanking her. It was my wedding. I finally spoke, my voice steady. No one thanked me in front of you to hurt you. She turned on me instantly. You enjoyed it. No, I said gently. I endured it. That seemed to disarm her for a second, but only a second. You think you're so noble, she hissed, canceling payments like some martyr. Daniel's tone didn't rise, but it grew stronger. She canceled because you told her she wasn't welcome. Lila looked at him like she didn't recognize him. I needed you to choose me, she said, softer now, but still edged with demand. I did. I chose to marry you, but I didn't choose to erase my sister. The silence that followed was thick. Lila's expression shifted, not to regret, but to calculation. If you walk away now, she said quietly, you'll look weak. Everyone already thinks she manipulated you. Daniel didn't flinch. Let them. That answer stunned her more than any argument could have. She stared at him, waiting for hesitation. There was none. So that's it? She asked finally. You're ending a marriage after one day? He swallowed hard, but his voice stayed calm. I'm ending a pattern that started long before yesterday. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Not because she was right, but because she didn't seem capable of understanding what had just happened. She thought this was about winning, about pride, about optics. She didn't realize it was about respect, and respect can't be negotiated under threat. You'll regret this, she said to him quietly. Maybe, but I'd regret staying more. Her gaze flicked to me one last time. You think you've won, she said coldly. I met her eyes calmly. There was never a competition. That seemed to frustrate her more than anger could have. Without another word, she turned and walked down the driveway, heels striking the pavement in sharp rhythm. Daniel stood at the door long after she disappeared into the darkness. I didn't speak. I didn't offer commentary. I simply waited. When he finally closed the door, he leaned his forehead against it and exhaled deeply. It's really over, he murmured. Not devastated, not triumphant, just acknowledging reality. Yes, I said softly. He turned around slowly. There were tears in his eyes now, not explosive grief, just quiet mourning. I wanted it to work, he admitted. I know. He wiped his face and gave a small, tired smile. Thank you for not attacking her. That surprised me. Why would I? He shrugged faintly. You could have. I shook my head faintly.
This wasn't about defeating her, it was about defending myself. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then he did something simple but profound. He walked over and hugged me, tightly, not out of desperation, but gratitude. And as I stood there holding my little brother, the grown man who had finally found his spine, I realized something important. This wasn't a story about revenge. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about a wedding. It was about respect, about what happens when kindness is mistaken for submission, and what changes when you quietly decide you are no longer available for disrespect. Later that night, after he went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt peaceful again. My phone buzzed once, a notification from social media. Lila had deleted her posts. I turned the phone face down. I didn't need to check the comments. I didn't need validation. The only thing that mattered was already clear. Some lessons arrived.
The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no surprise legal letters, no explosive family interventions, just a slow settling of dust. After Leela deleted her posts, the online whispers faded. People moved on to the next story, the next spectacle. It turns out that scandal has a short lifespan when there's no fuel feeding it. Daniel stayed with me for nearly a month. At first, he moved through the house like a guest, careful, apologetic, uncertain. But little by little, he relaxed. He started cooking dinner some nights. He fixed the loose cabinet hinge I'd ignored for years. He even reorganized the garage one Saturday morning without being asked. It wasn't about chores. It was about grounding, about rebuilding something steady after realizing how easily it could have been dismantled. One evening, about 3 weeks after the wedding, we sat on the back porch watching the sunset. The sky was streaked in soft pink and gold, almost like that vineyard sky, but without the tension underneath it. "I keep replaying everything," he admitted quietly, trying to pinpoint the moment I should have spoken up sooner. I sipped my tea before answering. "Growth doesn't happen at the first red flag," I said gently. "It happens when the pattern becomes undeniable." He nodded slowly. I ignored too many small things. Most people do, especially when they want something to work. He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "You know what scared me the most?" "What?" He hesitated. "How quickly I was willing to justify hurting you. If the payments hadn't stopped, I might have kept rationalizing it." His honesty didn't wound me. It healed something. "We all rationalize discomfort when we're afraid of loss," I said softly. "But fear makes poor decisions." He gave a faint smile. "You're not angry with me anymore, are you?" I looked at him carefully. "I was never angry at you. I was hurt. But hurt fades when there's accountability." He let out a slow breath, relief evident in his posture. "I've been thinking about something," he continued. "I don't want to rush into another relationship. I need to understand why I confused control with commitment." That level of reflection made me proud, not in a possessive way, in a quiet, grounded way. "That's wise," I said gently. "Marriage isn't about narrowing your world. It's about expanding it with someone who respects what already exists." He nodded. "I think I mistook intensity for love." I smiled gently. Intensity is loud. Love is steady. That seemed to settle into him. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. The air felt lighter now, not because the situation had been easy, but because it had been faced. Then one afternoon, about 6 weeks later, I received an unexpected message. It was from Leela. Not accusatory, not dramatic, simple. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Finally, I wrote back. "About what?"
Her reply came quickly. Closure. I showed the message to Daniel. He looked at it, then at me. You don't owe her anything, he said firmly. I know, I replied, but closure isn't always about owing, it's about releasing. After some thought, we agreed I would meet her in a public cafe, not to reconcile, not to debate, just to close the door properly. When I walked into the cafe, she was already seated. She looked different, less polished, less composed. She didn't stand when I approached. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I sat across from her. What did you want to say? She stared at her hands for a moment. I misjudged you. That wasn't the apology I expected, but it was honest in its own way. How? I asked calmly. She swallowed. I thought you were trying to compete with me. I felt insecure, and instead of admitting that, I tried to control the situation. There was no defensiveness in her voice now, just a tired clarity. Why? I asked gently. Because he trusted you, she admitted, and I didn't understand that trust could be shared. That answer felt raw, not polished, not performative. I nodded slowly. Trust isn't a pie, I said softly. It doesn't shrink when shared. She gave a faint, sad smile. I see that now. We sat in silence for a moment, then she said something that surprised me. When you canceled those payments, I hated you. But later, I realized you did something I wasn't brave enough to do. You set a boundary. I didn't gloat. I didn't soften it either. Boundaries protect dignity, I said simply. She nodded. I don't expect forgiveness, she added, but I wanted to acknowledge that I handled it wrong. I appreciated that she didn't demand reconciliation. She just owned her part. That was enough. I don't hate you, I said honestly, but I won't accept being diminished again. She nodded. That's fair. We didn't exchange hugs, we didn't promise friendship, but we parted without hostility. And sometimes peace without closeness is still peace. When I got home, Daniel looked at me expectantly. How was it? Calm, I replied. He searched my face. Do you feel better? I thought about it for a moment. I feel finished. And that was the truth. The wedding that never truly happened, the money that was never fully paid, the humiliation that turned into clarity, it had all served a purpose. It forced a reckoning, not just for Daniel, not just for Leela, but for me. I had spent years believing that love meant absorbing discomfort quietly, that being the strong one meant being silent. But strength isn't silence. Strength is steady boundaries. Strength is refusing to fund your own erasure. Strength is choosing dignity even when it costs you comfort. A few months later, Daniel moved into his own apartment, not far from me, but not dependent either. He started therapy. He reconnected with old friends. He rebuilt carefully, intentionally. And one Sunday evening, as we shared dinner at my kitchen table again, he looked at me and said, You know, that wedding falling apart was the best thing that ever happened to me. I smiled softly. Sometimes what collapses isn't meant to hold you. He raised his glass of water in a quiet toast.